What do we got happening here today, Ron? What's the event?
Just going to tell people about my writing and thank them for being here and being supportive, and tell them a little bit about how something goes from a blank page to a novel. Well, I am going to talk really about the Puppet Master and the Amendment Killer, and a little bit about Payback, which is the third one that will be coming. It's about half done. Should be due out in the end of 2019, first part of 2020, just depending on all the things that go into the final process.
Nice. What's that third book, Payback? How does that tie into it?
Well, Payback is the third in the series, and Brooks's wife is tired of him finding himself in life-threatening situations all the time. So she wants him to change to one of the things he has talked about doing, becoming a writer. So for their 54th anniversary, she buys them a registration for a week-long writers' conference, saying early in the book, what could possibly go wrong at a writers' conference? Meanwhile, there is a demented individual who is very mad at the literary community because they have rejected his manuscripts as a writer. And he shows up mysteriously at this writers' conference, and people start dying. And so Brooks, once again, to his wife's dismay, is caught up in life-threatening situations and having to figure out who this killer is. All the while, the board of directors of the conference is deciding whether they're going to share with the 2,000 people at the event what they know, that there is some killer on the loose. So you have the whole timely subject of corporate transparency, a la the Catholic Church, the women's gymnastics program in the United States, which had the doctor who was sexually molesting them and is now in jail, and even the University of Southern California, my alma mater, bringing it closer to home and talking about the gynecologist who was abusing women students at USC's health center for some 20 years that SC was sitting on, even though they knew it was happening. Or at least there are many people who say they knew it was happening. So that is Payback. And the thing that was going to be an easy segue to Brooks's wife's satisfaction to get him out of dangerous settings finds him right back in another one.
Fantastic.
Okay. Hello. Can everybody hear me? Yes, welcome. So glad you could make it all today. Happy to have Ron here for the prequel of The Amendment Killer. He's here for the Puppet Master today. And this has been in the works for quite some time, so we're very welcome to have him here today. And his wife Barbie is going to say a few words as well. So we're glad you're here.
Can everyone hear me? I just want to say one thing. Two things. I'm Barbie Barak. I'm also known as, to the people that read Ron's occasional blogs, the wife.
We knew that.
And without further ado, I would like to introduce Ron Barak, the husband.
Hello, everyone. everyone. Thank you all for coming.
Put your mouth next to the microphone. It's hard to hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm already being told what to do. That's the wife's job, Barry.
She gave part of it to me.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So I want the royalty. Thank you all for coming, and I want to first start with a few thank yous. First and foremost, to the wife, particularly since she blew this opportunity to take advantage of saying much more bad things about me than calling me the husband. So I dodged a bullet with that, but you're all witness. I gave her the opportunity. Next, I want to thank Diesel, who many of you may know is a real staple in this town when it comes to indie bookstores. They've been around a long time. They are really a wonderful store. When this is done, we'll have some book signings inside, and I even promised if you find other books that you like and you buy them, I'll sign those too. I'm wide open. I also want to thank in particular a few supporters who have been incredible through my writing. Sean Toohey, who is here, Jason Levy, and the Balberts, who some of you may know, Elliot and Cheryl. The three of them have bought more than $1,000 worth of the Puppet Master just to give the books away to worthwhile charities. So $500 worth of those books have gone to the Jewish Home, and they have a book club. They have already read, actually they've already read The Amendment Killer, and will soon be reading The Puppet Master. And then I get to go out there and let them bludgeon me or question me, whatever it is they would like to do. The Balberts are bi-coastal, so they are slumming in their New York home right now, but they actually sent a note and asked me to read it, which I dutifully said I would do. Dearest Ron and Barbie, sorry we can't be with you today to celebrate the launch of the Puppet Master, but enclosed is our check in the amount of $500 to purchase copies of the Puppet Master to be donated to the charity of your choice. Please keep writing. Congratulations. Love, Elliot and Cheryl. I also want to thank Edward Bauer and Ron Lynn, who are here today, and they are the ones who take this voice and give it real meaning. They make the audiobooks for the books I write, and you will get a little sample of that in a few minutes. They're terrific. I also want to thank Romeo Carey, who's the guy behind the camera here today, and he has a talk show on Spectrum that interviewed me about a week or so ago that was incredible. His show is called Box Hot, Channel 6 on local Spectrum cable. He does a great job. And I have a new friend here today to mention, April Davila of Lit Week LA, who writes a weekly blog about everything in literature locally in Los Angeles. And I met her because she was kind enough to mention this event in her blog. And again, all of you today who are here and whose support I very much appreciate and am very much honored to have. And I want to mention one other person as well, the one who has traveled the furthest to be here today, and that is Joe Hyams from Honest Reporting, which is an organization in Israel that makes sure to keep media honest when it comes to what they report about Israel and Israeli circumstances. So, let's talk a little bit about what got me started on this journey of writing. And the answer in 2 words is the dare. And the person who dared me, which he may or may not remember, is here today. His name is Bob Gertz. And years ago, a group of golfers at Brentwood Country Club would lunch, and still do to this day, after golf on Wednesday mornings. And we talk about current events, we talk about politics, we talk about television programs, movies, and books. And years ago, before this physics major and lawyer had any notion of being a writer, let alone an author, was talking about a best-selling author, all of whose books I've read, probably over a dozen, and like very much. But in my opinion, he had cheated on one of his books. He wrote the first in a trilogy, 3 books that you had to read all 3 to get any kind of closure. Only he didn't say that. And I got to the end of the first one, and there was no closure. And I was kind of disappointed. I am an advocate of instant gratification, and there was no gratification because there was no closure. So I was being critical of the book when we were talking about it at lunch. So Mr. Gertz stands up and says, if you're such a smartass, and I will say I cleaned up the way he said it just now, but he said, if you're such a smart so-and-so, why don't you get out of the back seat and show us what you can do? And so I didn't have much time to respond, but being, hopefully a pretty decent lawyer, I quickly changed the subject and pretended I didn't hear the gauntlet being thrown down. But being a competitive personality as well, I came home and I told the wife that I thought I needed to write a novel. And I had no idea what that entailed. So I just started writing. And one of the nice things about that is I thought this thing that was going to be incredibly painful really turned out to be a lot of fun. Partially because I didn't know anything yet about writing, so I didn't sense how badly I was doing. And it was fun. It was therapeutic. So the question is, why do I write? And the answer is, really, that's easy. For those who don't already know me, I love to hear myself talk. So how better than to become a writer? So that leads to, what do I write? Well, I write political and legal fiction. The reason for that is simple. I don't like doing research. And if you write political and legal fiction, you don't have to do much more other than read the newspapers. It's all there. We have all these politicians and all these lawyers, principally in Washington, D.C., who just provide infinite amounts of fodder, material to write about. So then, specifically, how do I choose my stories? Well, so far, I have written, they're still standing, 3 novels, not a trilogy, but 3 novels in the Brooks Latello series. And they all involve standalone stories. You can read any one in any order, but they all have the same protagonists, Cyrus Brooks and Frank Latello. The first that came out was The Amendment Killer last November. The Puppet Master is the second, what we are celebrating here today. It actually will officially release January 8th, but Diesel has special limited editions of it that are available today. And since you have to have at least one gaff for every event like this, the printers and UPS delivered inexplicably copies of the Puppet Master here in more than one shipment, one of which is not arriving until Tuesday. So Diesel says not to worry, they'll take pre-orders and the books will get hand-delivered to your door. So the first book, The Amendment Killer, some of you may know about it, but it begins with the words, we have your granddaughter. Here's what you need to do. That's the message received by a Supreme Court justice who holds the swing vote in a case the Supreme Court is hearing about whether an amendment to our Constitution criminalizing political corruption was properly enacted. That's the first example of my brand blurring, hopefully entertaining, page-turning stories. What's going to happen to this 11-year-old granddaughter who's been kidnapped to control the outcome of the case, while her grandfather has to decide whether doing what he thinks is best for the country is worth his granddaughter's life. Think about if you were in that position having to make that decision. The Puppet Master is about a vigilante serial killer going around in modern-day Washington, D.C., assassinating politicians that he feels are corrupt. In The Amendment Killer, you kind of know who the players are early on in the story. You just don't know what the outcome is going to be. Will the amendment be upheld? Will the 11-year-old granddaughter survive? If she does, how will she get out of her pickle? In The Puppet Master, it is a classic whodunit. You have to read the book from cover to cover to get to the reveal. And then you have to say, wow, did Ron cheat me? Or were the clues all there? And I will represent to you that the clues are all there. You just have to read very carefully. That's how I keep you tracked. The third book, coming out in about a year, is Payback. Payback is about a demented author of political and legal thrillers who is very unhappy with the literary community who he feels is not paying him enough attention. So he shows up at a week-long writers' conference patterned after a real one that I attend in New York every July, and people start dying. And Brooks is there. Why is a sitting judge at a writers' conference? Well, it's because his wife, Eloise, is tired of him always getting into trouble in his current occupation. So she decides he should become a novelist and go to a writers' convention and learn how. And she says to herself and all the readers, After all, what could go wrong at a writers' conference? And where is the contemporary legal issue? Well, you probably all know about the word transparency. The Catholic Church today is being criticized for a lack of transparency, all the way up to the Pope. In the gymnastics sports community, near and dear to my heart, we have a man who was the team doctor for our women's gymnasts competing internationally for 30 years. And he was sexually abusing them left and right. And people who could have done something about it and should have done something about it turned their back because it wasn't convenient to raise it. So you have the same issue at the University of Southern California, my alma mater, who has a gynecologist at the health center who was abusing women students coming to the health center. All of these were instances of transparency that were lacking. In payback, the board of directors of the Writers' Conference knows that there is a killer loose. And there are 2,000 people registered at this event, and they're not being candid about it because they don't want to run on the bank. They don't want everybody leaving the event and wanting their money back. So that's how I choose my stories. How do I choose my characters? So it doesn't just happen randomly. If you focus for a moment on Eloise and Cyrus Brooks, there is a lot of Ron and Barbie in Eloise and Cyrus Brooks. Frank Latello, who is Brooks's partner in crime, has a lot of characteristics that match our son Mark. And one of the characters, both in The Amendment Killer and in The Puppet Master, is Frank Latello's daughter, Madison, who is patterned after Barbie's and my oldest granddaughter. So there is usually something there. In The Amendment Killer, which is a case that takes place in the Supreme Court, there are 9 Supreme Court justices. Each one of those Supreme Court justices is one of my golfing buddies at Brentwood Country Club. Now, I don't use their real names, but it's close enough. You don't have any trouble knowing who they are. Several of them are here today. So that brings me to one more character that I want to briefly talk about in The Puppet Master. Barbie and I have a good friend by the name of Bob Harrison. Bob has been a professional at Brentwood Country Club for years and years and years. I don't want to date him or me, but it's a long time. Bob and his wife Lissa and Barbie and I are good friends and have been for years and years. In 1991, testing my memory a little, Bob and his wife and Barbie and I and another couple went to the Ryder Cup matches on Kiowa Island. For those of you who golf, that is the ultimate in golf competition. And we're there, and we're out there the first day, actually a practice day before the 3 days of matches start. And we're behind the ropes in the galley, watching players come through playing their practice round. And along comes a match or a practice group that included Ray Floyd and Freddie Couples and Payne Stewart and Paul Azinger. And Bob is standing right next to me, and all of a sudden I hear him shout, "Stud!"
Stud.
He shouts, "Stud!" More amazing than that, Ray Floyd stops on a dime out on the fairway, and he says, "Bobby H., where the hell are you? Get out here, boy!" And Bob does, and he brings us with him, and he introduces us to Ray Floyd, who he grew up with and knew for years. And Floyd, consummate gentleman and a nice guy, not to suggest Bob isn't. He introduced us to the rest of the foursome, and we walked that whole round with them, no longer stuck back behind the ropes in the galley. We were right there on the fairway for the whole round. So, to give an example, which I'll explain more in a second, Bobby H., where the hell are you?
Ronnie B. Right here, pal.
Ah, there he is. So, Bob became a character in The Puppet Master, an example of how I will often pick my characters. I remember the event on Kiowa Island at the Ryder Cup very well. I mean, it is stuck with me. And so, in The Puppet Master, Frank Latello is looking for the killer, and he has somebody he is investigating who is a member of Congressional Golf Club, a very famous golf club in Washington, D.C. And I hack poorly at golf, as some of you here can attest. And so I wanted to put some of my golf into the book. So turns out Frank Latello went to college with Bobby Harrelson, who just happens to resemble Bob Harrison. And he pays him a visit at Congressional. And Bobby Harrelson ends up helping Latello with his investigation. So it's customary at events such as this to have the author read a passage or two from one of his novels. And I thought, rather than do that, since you have now heard a little bit about Bobby Harrelson and actually met him briefly, I would have Edward Bauer, who is recording the audiobook for The Puppet Master, read a scene from the book between Frank Latello and Bobby Harrelson, who you just heard and briefly met. So, Edward, you want to come join us?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me, Ron. This is a pleasure. I usually only get to do this in a 6x10 soundproof box at home, so having the sunshine is quite a welcome change.
Having any sunshine.
Yeah.
Today is cool.
So this is from the middle of the book, chapter 89. Monday, August 3rd, 4:30 p.m. Congressional Country Club was a different kind of eye candy, one of which Latello had never tired. Of course, someone not bitten by the golf bug might not understand. Still, he hadn't played since Beth's death. Latello slowed as he reached the guard gate. "Can I help you?" the guard politely inquired, not recognizing Latello as one of the members. "My name's Frank Latello. I'm a guest of Bobby Harrelson. He's expecting me." That wasn't so. It didn't matter. Latello knew Harrelson would cover for him if the guard checked. "Have you been here before? Do you know where to park?" "I have, and I do." "Okay, enjoy your visit." "Thanks." Latello dropped his car off with the valet and headed for the pro shop. "Hi, Bobby Harrelson around?"
He's finishing a lesson down at the driving range.
"Thanks, I'll wander over there." I can get someone to give you a ride if you'd like. No, thanks. The walk will be nice. When he reached the driving range, Litello quietly took a seat and watched Harrelson finish his lesson. As the student walked off, Litello spoke up. Bobby, how the hell are you? Harrelson didn't even turn around. Frankie L., get your ass out here. How you been, boy? A rowdy, robust hug later, Litello said, Bobby, I swear you look younger every time I see you. How do you do it? A lot of fresh air, a couple of rounds a week, some good food, some better drinks. How are Maddie and Charlie? How are you? I'm doing okay. Still missing Beth. Still adjusting. But we're getting there. Harrelson nodded. So for a smart-ass detective, you really aren't all that smart. I keep after you to come out and shoot around with me, and you show up at 4:30. Why? Forget when the sun sets around here? Hey, Bobby, I need some help, but it's not with my game. I'll take some of your money when I have a little more time. Can I buy you a beer? Your money's no good here, Bubba. I'm happy to buy you one, or two. Let's go hit the grill. Clinking glasses 10 minutes later, Harrelson said, oh, maybe you're not so dumb after all, Frankie, talking all that trash about taking my money, but smart enough not to show up early enough in the day to have to back them words up. So, what can I do for my brother from another mother? I need to check out a guy by the name of Thomas Reston Thomas III. I think he was a recent guest here at Congressional. I'm looking to find out who hosted him. Thomas Reston Thomas III? Give me a break. That boy's mama weren't no friend of his. Can't say as I know the guy. I don't think I would forget a moniker like that. Do you know who hosted him? Well, actually, I think I do know who hosted him. What I want is to confirm what I think. You gonna tell me who the member is, or do I have to guess? Around 500 members here, Bubba. The member's name is Blaine Hollister. Do you know him? Yeah, I do. Wouldn't bother me none if I didn't. What's that? I've given him a few lessons, played a couple of rounds with him. He's not nearly as hot stuff out there as he thinks he is. For all his supposed money, it's amazing how he forgets to cover his losses. What's the connection between Hollister and Thomas? Well, that's what I'm trying to find out, Bobby. Can you pin down whether Hollister's ever hosted Thomas? What kind of talk is that? You sound like some of the members around this place. Did you forget we spent some time together in school? I know how the computers around this place work. I have access to them too. But folks around here are pretty big on privacy. Wouldn't go over very well if I was caught digging up what you want to know. No worries then, Bobby. I don't want to put you at risk. Don't you go insulting me, boy. If it's there, I'll get it for you. Just letting you know I can't do it till later tonight. Call me tomorrow morning, we'll see what we see. Meanwhile, I want to know when you're coming out here some morning for a proper round and putting some of your money where that mouth is. Soon, I promise. I'd really like to do that. When I get clear of what I'm working on, I'm going to take some time for yours truly. Bring Maddie and Charlie, too. It's never too soon for them to start hitting a few balls. For sure. Talk to you tomorrow. And thanks. For what? Don't know what you're talking about, boy.
Thank you, Edward. So that's a lot better than if I had read that. Not that I don't like to hear myself, but I can't do what Edward just did. So you see firsthand where characters come from when novelists write books. Usually it has something to do with their own life experiences. And in this regard, Frank Litello, as I said, has a lot of characteristics that resemble our son Mark. And he has two children. Maddie, which is Madison, named after our granddaughter, Mark's daughter, his oldest daughter, and Charlie, who just dropped in. I don't know where Charlie came from. But in any event, there you have it, and I want to thank you all again for coming out here and being as supportive as you have been. Diesel has a lot of copies of the books in there. If you buy them, I'll sign them. And there's lots of great books by other authors having nothing to do with me. Buy those too. I'll sign those also. I'm not proud. I'll sign anything you put in front of me. And with that, before we adjourn, I want to give any of you inquisitive souls who would like to ask any questions a chance to do so. So don't be bashful. Somebody go. Yes.
How long did it take you to write each of your books?
Well, you know, that's a relative question and a good one. It depends how much life gets in the way. If I can lock myself in a room and shut off the rest of the world, it takes me about 2 months to write a book. In the real world, where I can't go in the closet and shut the door and the world out, it takes me about a year. Now that includes writing it, rewriting it, working with copy editors who help me make look a little better than I am, and getting it through proofreaders and formatting specialists who make it look pretty instead of not so pretty, not changing any words, but making it look like a book rather than something you typed on 8.5 by 11 in a Word software. So the answer is either 2 months or a year, depending on which answer you really want. Larry.
When you start out, do you know what you're going to write, or do you start developing as you start writing?
That's a good question, and Larry doesn't have the advantage of the microphone that I did. So he said, when I start writing a novel, do I know what I'm going to write about, or do I just start writing? And the answer to that, in my case, is I just start writing. There are two schools of writers of literary fiction. One is known as plotters. The other is known as pantsers. The plotters make an outline from start to finish before they write the first paragraph. Jeff Deaver, who is a New York Times best-selling author, spends typically 6 months making about 100 to 120 page outline of what he's going to write, and then he writes it in about 2 months. He is the consummate plotter. He knows everything that's happening before he writes the first paragraph of the novel. Lee Child, who has been very kind and supportive of me, who writes the Jack Reacher novels, is the consummate pantser. Pantser is short for I write by the seat of my pants. Lee writes the first sentence because he sits down with a blank tablet and a pencil, and in fact starts on January 7 every year because he is superstitious, and that was the date on which he began to write his first Jack Reacher novel. And he looks at this blank page until a sentence appears to him. He writes it down, and when he writes it down, he swears he doesn't know what the second sentence is going to be. And there are a lot of writers who are that way. I am that way, not quite as consummately so as Lee. When I wrote The Amendment Killer, for example, I knew what the issue was going to be. I knew that there was a question of whether the U.S. Constitution can be amended by we the people without having to go through Congress, as Article 5 in the Constitution seems to suggest is required. I knew that was going to be a fundamental issue, and I knew what the outcome was going to be, but that's about all I knew. I didn't even have the 11-year-old granddaughter of the Supreme Court Justice in the story, let alone being kidnapped to make the story. It just developed as I went along. So I don't know what the story is really going to be about when I start writing it, other than a kernel of what the subject is.
Ron, we're gonna have to.
Okay, any other questions before we get the hook? Ross?
Yeah, so the way you describe the payback, that's sort of your move into autobiographical work?
No, it's only autobiographical, kind of tongue-in-cheek.
So is the question.
You need to be able to poke fun at yourself, and I'm doing that. And an interesting thing is, all of the people who get killed in Payback, they're all real-world, very accomplished novelists who have become friends of mine and supporters of mine. And I ran the first 100 pages by that, wondering whether I would still have anyone left that would talk to me. Because there's a lot of underbelly about the writing community that is in this book. And they all came back without exception and said they absolutely love it, including the ones that were killed. Yeah, it's autobiographical, but that's only with respect to those who don't think I'm the best writer. So we have the hook. I want to thank you again for coming, and hope you will all go visit next door, That Away on an Angle in Diesel, and buy some books, and I'll come in there and sign them if you do. Thank you very much.
Ron. We buy our autograph. Yes, my wife is. We got to go inside for take pictures. She's Mandy's.
I have a pen if you need it.
Yeah, if you have a pen, give it to me. I have one, but I don't know which pocket it's in.
Again, I don't want to be in the picture. Here, let me go. Tony.
No, I was thinking of saying absolute.
Okay.
I got it. My card's on the other side.
She's got a business.
Yeah, I know that I have to concentrate on it, and he's done that.
He gets going.
They're page turners. You just read one, and when you get to the end of that one little chapter, you got to get to the next chapter.
I was one of the characters in the book.
Is that right?
Yes, I was. And that was interesting. I was one of the justices of the Supreme Court. Because I know the author, it was fascinating to me that a man like this that I know could write such a book, you know, and it was just, and I was glued to it, and I couldn't wait to finish. I couldn't wait to see how she got out of it. I knew she was going to get out, but I couldn't wait to see how it was.
Twice. Thanks for coming.